Between the years of 2009 and 2016, over 86 bodies have been pulled from the Manchester Canal in England. The death count continues to grow staggeringly high, leaving many members of the general public seriously concerned and shaken, all the while believing that there's a serial killer on the loose. The police remain vigilant surrounding these highly suspicious deaths, and with very little information to go on, one question remains. Is there a serial killer out there, lurking in the semi-subterranean underworld of Manchester, stalking the canal networks? Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Wherever you may be in the world right now, hello, my name is Lloyd, and right now you're watching When Evil Follows. For so many years now, there's been a very dark and upsetting, sinister rumour floating around the city of Manchester. An elusive serial killer could potentially be out there and on the prowl, lurking in the shadows near the canal banks of the city centre. He's been nicknamed the Pusher, and although he's never been caught, along with very little eyewitness accounts, many people out there dare to question his existence. Some say that he doesn't exist. Others say it could potentially just be hype from the media, just to sell another story.
But many people do in fact believe he's real.
As of 2015, the story went viral when a disturbing statistic was released to the general public. 86 bodies have all been recovered from the Manchester waterways since 2009. 28 of these victims were returned as an open verdict. Many of these cases can be concluded that the cause of death is completely accidental.
Don't do it!
Intoxication, drugs, stupidity, poor lighting, and slippery conditions. Plunging into an ice-cold canal in the dead of night will make the body react in many ways. Shock, paralysis, panic, hypothermia, along with wet clothing, restricting movement, and increasing weight will all play a sketchy role. When walking down a stretch of the canal, the barriers are hit and miss. They seem to be there in certain areas, leaving large areas of the waterside unprotected, enhancing the chances of someone
Having some kind of accident.
Millions of pounds have been spent over the years by the council to better the city on artwork, sculptures, statutes, and the list goes on. But given the death rates on the canals is so high, very little has been done on the safety for pedestrians walking along the canal. However, there's a 25% of these cases that really don't make any sense. Many of the victims' families believe that there was definitely foul play
Involved.
and if there is somebody out there with murderous intentions,
And it's very alarming, to say the least.
especially if someone is out there on the prowl and lurking in the shadows of the waterways in wait for an easy victim. In the April of 2018, a 34-year-old local man by the name of Tom Bennett was cycling along the Bridgewater Canal. It was late in the evening and he was travelling home from work after a long day, and as he made his way along the cycle path, he did not notice a dark figure step out of the shadows in front of him.
Until it was too late.
This figure swung his forearm out across his path, sending Tom flying over the handlebars and into the deadly embrace of the nearby waters. Now fighting the freezing paralysis that had instantly started to affect his muscles, Tom swam hard for the nearest bank, and as he planted one hand firmly on the side and went to raise his other to climb up onto the riverbank, a savage kick sent him flying backwards, and once again into the icy waters. This time the struggle to regain back to the surface was twice as difficult and twice as hard as before, with every single muscle and joint starting to freeze up in protest. Kicking his legs as hard as he could to remain afloat and raggedly gasping for breath, Tom could still see this shadowy figure still standing there patiently at the canal side,
As if he was anticipating his next move.
Starting to tire, Tom turned his head from the right to the left, looking around for assistance, but the streets around him remained stubbornly quiet and void of life. Desperately, he begins sculling backwards to the far side of the channel, feeling his strength fade with every single stroke. Almost immediately, the silence was broken by the sound of approaching sirens. Tom's elation upon first hearing the speeding police car proved to be short-lived, as the emergency services vehicle hurtled straight past them en route to another incident. But it was just enough to force his assailant to retreat back into the dark shadows.
And off into the night.
When the shaken, shivering commuter eventually made it back home, he told his wife what happened. She took straight to Facebook to warn others in the community. And over the next few months or so, the bodies of two young men would be recovered by police from the local canal banks. Word immediately spread throughout the city like wildfire.
The pusher was back and on the prowl.
The idea of a serial killer that could be stalking the streets of Manchester was first suggested back in 2015, whilst liaisoning with authorities about an unrelated matter. A local journalist discovered over 85 dead bodies had been pulled out of the canal waterways in the previous 7 years. And when studying this data, the reporter was astonished to discover that roughly a third of these cases resulted in an open verdict. This is one of the more extraordinary rulings that a coroner can make, in essence admitting that they cannot define the circumstances leading up to the person's death with any degree of any certainty, disregarding incidents classified as murder or fatalities arising to similar crimes. A total of 28 unexplained deaths remained. The victims were mostly all male, and in each case, the coroner has eliminated possibilities of suicide or misadventure. More worryingly, there's evidence that in many of these cases the victims were not alone at the time of their deaths. On the 17th of November, in the year of 2010, Nathan Tomlinson was drinking at a canal sidebar in the city with colleagues at a Christmas party. The 21-year-old trainee teacher had sent a text message to his mother at precisely 10:30 p.m. to let her know that he hadn't had much to drink and that he would be home soon. The following morning, when he still hadn't arrived home, his parents, full of worry, rang the police and reported him as missing, convinced that something untowards had happened to him. Whilst not immediately concerned, the local police were conscious that there had already been 11 water-related deaths within the city that year alone, and so search efforts in and around the local waterways were carried out. However, no dice, and there would be no luck. And, even worse, it would be a long and painful 7 weeks later when Nathan's remains would be located near the Aldify Bridge, a stretch of the river in Iwell. CCTV inquiries tracked back from where the body was found, showing that Nathan had taken an unnecessary detour of over a 2-mile radius in the opposite direction from his home address. At times in the footage he can be seen clearly breaking into a run and looking over his shoulder as if he was being chased or followed. And that in itself is just eerily strange. When he was discovered days later, His phone, wallet, passport and coat were missing and nowhere to be found.
Nathan's mother told police that she believed he had been attacked and mugged.
However, their care response was that there was no evidence for this. Nathan had sustained no obvious signs of injury, and that his missing items could have easily have gotten lost the moment he entered the water. And despite her pleas for further investigation, the case was closed. On New Year's Eve, in 2012, art student Suvik Pau was socialising in the city with his friends from his college course. By the time they arrived at a local club to end their evening, they'd become separated into smaller groups. Suvik arrived at the club alone and was refused entry by the doorman for being too intoxicated, despite 7 numerous determined attempts to get in. Whilst his friends continued to party inside the club, assuming that he was already inside somewhere. He sent numerous text messages, but due to the network being busy, these were not received until the following morning. The club's CCTV camera shows him remonstrating with door staff before walking down by a nearby canal lock in the company of another male. The two figures were briefly picked up on CCTV camera that was attached to one of the club's neighbouring buildings, before disappearing down into one of the more secluded stretches of the Bridgewater Canal. Half an hour later, one of the two can be seen emerging before disappearing into the dark depths of the nearby industrial estate. Suvik's body was eventually found 22 days later. Officers investigating Suvik's death told his family that they believe that he and another male had been trying to find somewhere to cross the canal in order to sneak into the back of the club, into the smoking area, and that they believe that Suvik had somehow fallen into the water and been unable to get out due to the level of intoxication. The student's family rejected this hypothesis, stating that their son would have easily been spotted by nightclub bouncers, particularly if he would have swam across the canal. He also asked why, if this was the case, the other man that Suvik was with has not identified himself, and why didn't he try and find help for his son? Clearly, the police theory it doesn't make any sense.
Once again, the death was filed as unexplained, and against the family's wishes.
By far the most disturbing and mystifying case attributed to the pusher is that of David Plunkett, a university student who disappeared on his way home in April
2004.
when his parents received a phone call from one of his friends at 1:30 AM in the morning, concerned that David had become separated from the rest of the main group. David's mother immediately called David's mobile phone. However, the call was unanswered until the third attempt, and when the call connected, David's mother couldn't get a reply from the person who was on the other end. She desperately tried to get David to talk to her, even pleading with him to tell her where he was so she could go and pick him up. But all she could hear was the sound of a person on the other end of the call, breathing down the phone, and what sounded like David, who was walking around somewhere outside. After 8 minutes of frantic attempts of trying to get David to speak, his mother was horrified to hear the sound of an anguished and terrified scream just before the phone line went dead. And when subsequent following calls failed to connect, she then contacted the police. 2 weeks later, David's bruised body was found submerged in water and less than a mile from the pub he'd been drinking at. The family were told that the weather that night had been particularly poor, and David's injuries were consistent with having drunkenly fallen into the water. Again, David's mother and father refused to accept the official explanation. If he had been drunk and was looking for a taxi, then the canal would be the very last place he would have been. And at no point during the call did she hear any sound of splashing or any other noises consistent with him falling into water. The parents couldn't think of any other reason for why he wouldn't respond to them on the phone, unless he was being held against his will under duress. And they were also both convinced that the horrifying scream they heard must have been from their son, in the realization of knowing he was about to be killed. With somewhere in the region of 500,000 residents, Manchester has a population roughly half that of Birmingham and Amsterdam, both of which possess urban canal networks of comparable size. And yet the number of water-related deaths in both of those cities is nowhere near as high, strongly indicating that something very sinister is taking place on the canal networks of Manchester. Despite best efforts from the Greater Manchester Police, who have deployed a combination of both uniform and undercover officers onto the canal footpaths at night to try and keep revellers safe. On the other hand, drowning has always been somewhat perceived as the perfect means for getting away with murder. Recovering criminal evidence from a body that's been submerged for any length of time has always proven notoriously difficult for investigators. With blood and fibre transfers washed away and DNA evidence quickly degraded beyond any effective use, is it understandable how or why police could somehow feel ineffective regarding certain cases? In each of these 3 examples I've mentioned, there have been overwhelming evidence to suggest that at least one other person was directly involved with each one of the deaths. For example, who was chasing Nathan Tomlinson the night he was last seen alive? To the mystery man who accompanied Suvik Powell, captured on CCTV, the night he was last seen alive. And whoever it was David Plankett was screaming at, they made sure that it would be with his final breaths. The stories of the Manchester pusher have continued to circulate and swirl around the public consciousness, with no signs of it showing of going away. It's a theory that's simply too attractive for people to discard as a possibility, and the stubborn resistance of the authorities to acknowledge it only makes this case much more compelling. And in the meantime, if you are one of the many people that visit the bars and clubs along the waterways in Manchester,
all I can say to you is, watch your back.
hello there, and I don't know about you guys, but you definitely won't be seeing me in and around the Manchester waterways anytime soon. So what do you believe? Is there a serial killer stalking the canal footpaths at night? Bear in mind, 28 of these cases were returned as open verdict. So could it be perfectly possible that 28 out of the 85 were victims of the Manchester pusher? Or are all these deaths simply related to completely different circumstances? The one thing we do know is many families involved strongly believe that foul play was apparent. But let me know what you think in the comment section below. Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and don't forget to hit the bell, that way you'll get notifications each and every time we upload cool and interesting videos similar to this one. And guys, don't forget to hit the like button, as it's the kindest and easiest way of showing your appreciation. And with all that being said and done, do look after yourself, stay safe, and I'll see you again real soon, the next time, when evil follows. Bye.